So you're looking for paramotor training and you don't know where to begin. Well, let me tell you a little bit about what we do here at Backcountry PPG and why you should consider coming through one of our training programs. So I'm going to walk you through every single day, starting with day number one. Day number one, minute number one. This is the first time for most of the students that they have ever touched a paraglider, ever seen a paraglider, ever seen a paramotor. And it's the intimidating, scary, nervous first moments. This is where you learn that you have absolutely no idea which hand is your left hand and which hand is your right hand. This is where you're really just trying to grasp that concept of which brake to pull at which time and why and when and all of that stuff. This is typically a very nerve-wracking, intimidating, intense training session that starts with you flipping a wing upside down over and over and over and over again. But throughout the day of day number one, students typically start to get the hang of it to where an instructor can step away. You know, the first hour, first 2 hours, it's really hands-on. It's me standing right there, another instructor standing right there, helping guide you in this process. And then we kind of start to step back. And the entire goal of us stepping back is to let you practice. A lot of your skill building, a lot of the stuff that you're going to learn is done without us standing right there. More on the solo, individual, you in the wing kind of time is when you really make progress. So we kind of step back, and that leads us into day number two. On day number two, it's really about, hey, how can we just make these little micro corrections throughout the day to kind of help improve that skill set? It's not so much about me standing right there, an instructor standing right there, yelling commands at you. It's, hey, let's have you do this over and over and over and over and over again so many times that you don't need us, right? How can we step in and just give a small correction? How can we step in and just make a small tweak at every little step and not just be standing there yelling instructions at you? And so that's kind of what day number two is. This is where students really start to get it. This is where it starts to click and you can keep that wing up for a couple of minutes without losing control. That's reverse kiting, forward kiting, the both shebang mix. That's really where you're practicing. A lot of these students at this point will have done a good combination between forward kiting and reverse kiting, reverse launches and forward launches. Here in Utah, we usually have good conditions for both reverse kiting and for light wind forward inflation practice. So you're practicing hooking in over and over and over again. You've practiced laying out the wing over and over again, and you're just going through those motions, continuing to put in the reps, as we call it, the repetition, the practice, the exposure. How can you just get as much time with that equipment as possible? That rolls us into day number three, and this is really just a repetition of the prior 2 days. This is more and more and more practice. By day number three, we as the instructors have really kind of stepped back. We're not hooking you up to the glider. We're not walking the glider out. We're not taking it out. We're not putting it away. We're not doing any of that stuff. And the reason that we don't do those things as the class starts to go on is because it's super important that you as a pilot become very independent. I want you as the pilot to know how to do all of this stuff without us standing right there doing it for you. If we hooked you in and laid your wing out every single time, well, by day 11, when you go home and you're flying by yourself and you go to lay your wing out by yourself for the very first time, it's very intimidating. So as the class rolls on, it's really important for us to take that stepped back approach. How can we not do something? How can we do as little as possible? And I'll tell you, that right there is extremely difficult for us because it's in our nature to want to help you. But by day three, we're really stepping back. Then students are just practicing. How many hours can you physically stay hooked up to this wing in that sun, just continuing to do the same thing over and over and over again? Because when it comes to paramotors, it's all about the reflexes. It's about the muscle memory. It's about your ability to keep that glider under control no matter what is happening, and that's what you get through repetition. Day number four is, again, a repeat of that. By day number four, we're not just focusing on the left and the rights and keeping that wing above us. Typically, people have got that figured out. That's when we're really pushing for those no hands. We've got the no hands dialed. We're really focusing on a good clean turnaround. That way you can go from reverse to forward. We're really focusing on the oscillation control and all of that stuff. By this time, by day three, by day four, we're also introducing the motor. So one thing that we really focus on here at Backcountry PPG is we love to put the motor on you while you're kiting. That way you can get a lot of practice with the motor. The first time you ever put a paramotor on your back, it's going to feel uncomfortable, it's going to feel heavy, it's going to feel cumbersome. By about the 50th time you put it on, you're going to forget it's even there. And that is just through your exposure. So the whole goal of the training is how much exposure can we give you by the time you take your first flight? That way you're already comfortable with that piece of equipment. So by day 3, by day 4, we're putting the motor on your back. You're kiting with the motor. You're doing forward inflations with the motor. You have the throttle in your hand. You're practicing what that feels like. You're practicing how to hold the brakes, the A's, the throttle all at the same time without the motor on. This is just kiting. This is just holding the equipment on your back. And that's going to be what you do day 3, day 4, day 5. You're really going to be practicing with that equipment. That leads us into day number 5. Typically by day number 5, this is when we're actually putting the helmets and the radios on you, and I'm giving instruction through the radio instead of just standing next to you telling you. The reason I want to do that is because I really want to introduce every single piece of learning to fly before you ever fly. That goes as far to the radio, the helmet, because it feels different. It's different when the radio's, in your ear and someone's talking in your ears versus talking next to you. And so that's when we start to introduce that. We're now talking to you through the radio. We're now talking to you, through the helmet instead of just standing there next to you. We've also got the motor on. You've got the throttle. You've got the brakes. You've got the wing. You're reverse kiting. You're forward kiting. You're, doing forward inflations. You're doing all of it with that stuff. Once your forward inflations look good, once everything's starting to look good, that's when we're going to do what's called a power forward. A power forward is where we turn that motor on and where you practice your forward inflations, your reverse launches with the motor running, and if all looks good, you add just a little power and run down the field. What this does is it shows you and trains out the fear of the throttle. It trains out the fear of that transition of getting into that throttle. And it shows you that you have to keep your feet running. It's very normal for pilots to sit down on their first launch and do what we call a butt launch, where you sit down and hit the ground. And so by doing these power forwards, as we call them, it kind of trains that out of the student. It also introduces the next piece, which is what the power feels like with the wing on you. As soon as you start to add that power, it kind of distracts you and it takes you away from that wing. And by adding that power and that throttle while you're on the ground, it really helps with that. Then we roll into day number 6, and day number 6 is going to be a repetition of what we just did on day number 5. This is going to be more power forwards and more kiting with that motor. Now, if it looks good, if your power forwards look good, if you can get 3 solid power forwards under control, no oscillation, we then go flying, right? We've introduced all of these pieces. You've practiced the throttle. You've practiced the kill switch. You've run it up on the ground. You've sat in the simulator where you run through the entire first flights. You've run the motor all the way up. You've laid your wing out 100 times. You've hooked in 100 times. Then we go for your first flight. And one thing that we really push for, like I mentioned earlier in this video, during the training program, is that you're very independent. I am not going to hook you up to your wing your very first flight. I am not going to get you your controls. I am not going to do any of that stuff. I want you to do it. I'm going to stand there and make sure you did it correctly, but I don't want to be the one to do it. And the reason being is that way when you go home and you're doing it by yourself, when you're actually going to fly by yourself, you're not needing and feeling weird because you don't know how to do it or because it's your first time hooking in without someone there. After we've gotten those power forwards looking good, we then go for those first flights. And those first flights are always, or very commonly, very smooth because we've gone through the process of introducing each step. More often than not, people nail their very first launches with this strategy of introducing all of the pieces, and it looks beautiful. If we can get to first launches before day 6, we do. If we can't, we don't. And another thing that's super important for us here at Backcountry PPG is that we don't guarantee you're going to fly. We very rarely have students who don't fly, but we don't guarantee it. And the reason that's in your advantage is because that means if you are not to the point by the end of the 10 days where you should be flying, we will not fly you. Moving on to day number 7, this is going to be a repetition some more. What you're going to learn a lot of paramotor training is just repetition. It's about how can we tweak and make little tiny changes throughout the class to build habits and muscle memory in the places you need them. This is going to be more flights, more flights, more flights. How can we get you as many reps, as we call them, of the flights, of the launches, of the landings as possible? Typically, you're going up and you're flying for maybe 10 minutes coming in and landing, resetting yourself up, going flying again for another 10, 20 minutes landing. And it's about maximizing every minute of that good flying window that we have in the morning and the evenings. Typically, students are going to leave the class with more than or equal to 20 flights. and they're going to be doing those 20 flights with or by themselves. I'm not hooking you up. I'm not, standing there next to you the entire time. This is you going out and going flying. And my job on the radio as day 7, as day 8, as day 9, as day 10 roll around is I want to say as little as possible. My goal on radio is to say nothing. My goal as an instructor is to not have a job. I don't want to be standing there having to tell you every single piece of what to do, and that's really what we push for at this class. So moving on to day number 8, it's more flying, right? It's going to be more and more and more flying. And how can I get to the point and tweak these little pieces to where you don't need me to be on radio? Many of your launches by day number 8, I'm not going to be saying anything. Many of your landings by day number 8, I'm not going to be saying anything. I'm going to be standing there ready to say something, button pushed radio to my mouth, but the goal is not to say anything. And that goes back to the independence. That goes back to when you go home, when you fly by yourself for the very first time, it's not new. It's not the first time that you've ever gone and launched by yourself. It's not the first time that you've ever, hooked in by yourself. It's not the first time you've ever done a forward inflation. It's not the first time. This is the 50th time that you've done it or the 30th time that you've done it. It's normal to you. It's comfortable to you. It doesn't scare you. Moving on to day 9, moving on to day 10, this is just repetition. This is more and more and more flying. How can we nail those launches? How can we nail those landings? How can we build that confidence level as high as we can? If by day 9, by day 10, a couple of the students are looking really good, I will take you on a cross-country flight up into the mountain. We as a class will go on a group flight together. This last training class that we just completed, me and a couple of the students went flying up a mountain range, and we just got to explore and experience paramotors for what they really are in this beautiful aircraft that gets you to go and explore things that you've never seen before. So that's really what we push for. That's how Backcountry PPG runs the training program. It's really focused on independence. It's really focused on that glider control. It's really focused on that reflex or the reflexes and muscle memory, and that's what we do best. If you are interested in learning how to fly at our training program, we do training all year round. We've got a class coming up in October with space. We've got a class coming up in November. I'm not sure when you're seeing this video, but check out our website, link in the description below. It will give you information on the details of the class, where the class is, how the class works, how much it is, and all of that stuff. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you listening to this video, and I will see you in the next one.